thousands of monks continued to demonstrate despite warnings by the military government. Britain's ambassador to Myanmar said the government assured him that the protests would be dealt with in a correct fashion. And as concern grows around the world, US President George Bush has outlined new sanctions against the ruling junta. Ayman Mohyuddin has more.
The protests grow, but so too fears of bloodshed. Stung by the massive monk-led demonstrations, Myanmar's military generals are threatening a violent crackdown. State-run television aired a warning from the country's religious affairs minister. He threatened action against the pro-democracy demonstrators if they refuse to disperse, telling all citizens, "We warn the monks and the people not to participate in protest marches. We will take action under the existing law." Loudspeakers have been reiterating the warning throughout the capital, also carried on state television.
Members of the Sangha not to get involved in party politics.
Seen in these pictures exclusive to Al Jazeera, the country's police forces appear to be training for a possible confrontation. It's a chilling reminder of the country's crackdown in 1988, when blood spilled onto the streets and more than 3,000 innocent people were killed. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged authorities to engage in dialogue.
We again urge the authorities in Myanmar to exercise utmost restraint, to engage without delay in dialogue with all the relevant parties to the national reconciliation process.
The question is whether the protesters who've come this far will just walk away. They're terrified of what the army could do to them, but buoyed by the recent show of strength as decades of repression erupted into the open.
This is the moment of truth for our Burmese people. They have been waiting for a chance like this more than 19 years. They have been severely repressed by the regime, but they didn't have a chance to show their will like this.
The U.S. is stepping up pressure on the regime, announcing increased sanctions.
The United States will tighten economic sanctions on the leaders of the regime and their financial backers. We will impose an expanded visa ban on those responsible for the most egregious violations of human rights, as well as their family members.
But China, also a UN Security Council member, has for now ruled out getting involved.
We will not interfere in the internal affairs of another party or interfere in the relations between this party and other parties.
With the military now on the streets, it's unclear what will happen to the demonstrators. Ayman Mohyuddin, Al Jazeera.
And we are hearing reports from Associated Press, from residents in fact, that curfews have been announced for Myanmar, the cities of Yangon and Mandalay. So that's from AP, that residents are reporting that curfews have been announced for Yangon and Mandalay. Now, with those huge protests on the streets that we've been talking about, people in and out of the country are more desperate than ever for reliable information, that they can't get from the state-run media. Many are turning to broadcasters such as the Norway-based Democratic Voice of Burma. Well, Barnaby Phillips has been to visit the station in Oslo.
These are busy times at the Democratic Voice of Burma. Undercover reporters ringing in from home, listeners calling from all over the world. Most of the team here are dissidents who fled military rule. Overseeing operations is Ai Chan Yang. He was a student leader in the brutally crushed 1988 protests, so he knows his reporters on the ground are taking enormous risks.
They are, of course, all undercover, and they've been nowadays, for example, hiding in different places, and they don't sleep in their home. And then when the demonstration come out in the daytime, they all come out and film or report back to us.
With the situation at home now so critical, the journalists here are stepping up their output. They've just gone from 2 to 9 hours radio broadcasts a day. And from this studio, they're doing more television, using tapes smuggled out of Myanmar.
And they has been filmed secretly and smuggled.
Here they're editing a feature on the growth of gambling amongst children in Myanmar. Even this is a sensitive subject. Now they're receiving lots of pictures of demonstrations, like this one filmed from a passing bus. These pictures are watched by an eager audience back home and broadcast around the world by news organizations.
It's a very exciting period, and it's a very important moment for Burma. And right now I think it's kind of quite a critical situation. It could lead to the fall of the military regime in Burma, or it could lead to a major bloodshed in Burma.
They say their objective is not to help overthrow the military, but their support for opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi is obvious. Their dream is for their station to be allowed to broadcast from home so they can end their exile. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, Oslo.
World leaders are gathered at the United Nations in New York, where they're setting out their own vision for solving the world's most serious crisis. The 62nd meeting of the General Assembly has heard calls for an end to the genocide in Darfur and a commitment to impose new sanctions on the military regime in Myanmar. Well, the session was opened by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
I will leave no stone unturned to end the tragedy in Darfur. The government of Sudan must live up to its pledge to join comprehensive peace talks and implement a ceasefire. We must also move forward with the agreement that ended the long-running civil war between North and South and prepare for elections in 2009. The crisis in Darfur grew from many causes. Any enduring solution must address all of them: security, politics, resources, water, humanitarian and development issues. Iraq has become the whole world's problem. With the new Security Council Resolution 1770, the United Nations has an important role in promoting political negotiation and national reconciliation, as well as in providing humanitarian assistance to the Iraqi people. But we recognize that the safety and security of UN staff is paramount.
The Palestinian territories have moderate leaders, mainstream leaders that are working to build free institutions that fight terror and enforce the law and respond to the needs of their people. The international community must support these leaders. In Belarus, North Korea, Syria, and Iran, brutal regimes deny their people the fundamental rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration.
Well, the French President Nicolas Sarkozy turned his attention to Iran during his first speech at the United Nations, and specifically Iran's controversial nuclear program.
There will be no peace in the world if the international community falters in the face of the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Iran is entitled to nuclear power for civilian purposes, but if we allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, we would incur an unacceptable risk to the stability of the region and the stability of the world.
In Iraq, at least 7 people are dead after car bombs exploded in different parts of the capital, Baghdad. And in the southern city of Basra, a suicide car bomb hit the city's police headquarters, killing 3 people and wounding 20. The dead were all policemen. And the attack comes amid fears over deteriorating security in the city. Meanwhile, the death toll from Monday's bombing of a mosque in Bakuba, north of Baghdad, has risen to 28. The blast targeted local leaders holding reconciliation talks over an evening meal to break the Ramadan fast. The city's chief of police was among those killed. Lebanon's pro-government politicians have been thwarted in their attempt to elect a new president. As expected, opposition members boycotted the vote, which meant there were not enough MPs for proceedings to continue. It caps a difficult week for the country, during which another of its politicians was assassinated. From Beirut, Zaina Khodr looks at the day's events and where Lebanon goes from here.
The much-anticipated date arrived and the 60-day countdown to elect a new president began. Amid tight security, deputies headed to the parliament building in downtown Beirut under armed escort from a heavily guarded hotel not far from here. Most of them were from the March 14 coalition pro-government camp.
What we're doing today is we're here just because it's our duty to be here, to vote for a president. We cannot have our own interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution is clear, and at the end of the mandate of Emil Lahoud, there should be a new president.
They entered the legislature's assembly hall, the first time this chamber has been opened in almost a year since the political crisis between the pro-government camp and the opposition began. But the 68 deputies of the March 14 coalition falls short of the 2/3 quorum for an election to be held.